I started way back in '61, well before you were born, and worked with Lee Falk. He was a master writer. He really knew how to create suspense. And but I must say, he was a difficult person to work with. He wasn't an easy person to work with. We had trouble working out our schedules. He wouldn't listen to my concept of the schedule, and he always I would talk to him, give him a schedule, written schedule, and then he'd do what he wanted. So that was the one area that was a raw spot between the two of us. But otherwise, we got along reasonably well. Then I retired in '94, and he passed away, I think 2000, 2001, around then. And I never really spoke to his wife, his widow, but I met her a couple of times. And but those 33 years were, as far as my artistic enjoyment, it was a great experience, really was. And I loved the stories he wrote. He was a very good writer. He really was. He was starting to lose it a little bit in the late years, in the 90s, the early 90s, late 80s. He would leave. He would start a story where somebody was abandoned somewhere by the Phantom. He was left there temporarily, and the Phantom would forget to go back and pick him up. Yeah. And suddenly the story was ending because he was tired of the story. It was running too long, so he decided to cut it short. And I said, wait, just a minute, don't cut it short. You left this poor guy in a cave somewhere, you know. Yeah. Well, I definitely enjoyed working on the strip all those years. I loved doing that kind of character, and I liked his idea. It was a brilliant idea, having him appear to have lived 400 years, you know, and according to the natives. But I think it had a little bit. It never did quite break away from the fact that. I think he kind of was kind of condescending in a way he treated the natives and the local governments, Lee, in his stories.
I understand that you showed talent for drawing since a very, very early age. Can you tell us when and how your passion for comics began, and which were the authors and strips that caused the biggest impact in you?
Right. The strange thing is that I never wanted to use the comic artists. I mean, the better artists like Alex Raymond and Hal Foster, and even though I admired them, I always wanted to be an illustrator. I really didn't look at comics as an area of work for me as a career. But because I was always drawing people and drawing live portraits, and I always liked drawing people, particularly figures as well as portraits. And I liked doing still life, but I always wanted to do it in color, but I didn't have the equipment to do things in color, so I always did things in black and white. And, you know, we were very poor, and I couldn't afford the expensive supplies needed to make a full illustration in full color. So it wasn't until my late teens when I started working. When I was about 17, I started working in comics, began doing little filler pages. Most books were either 32 or 28 pages. And if you had only, in a 32-page book, if you had only 30 pages of artwork, they would use filler pages where they'd have a short story going on in one page. So you had to write it and draw it. And I would write a filler page and draw it and present it. And it sold in this is the way I got started, picking up little pages here and there. And then I began doing some inking for a couple of places, for DC and for Marvel. At that time, it was called Timely when I started out. And DC was called National Comics. They were in New York. And so I did that till 61 when I got this strip from King Features. It seemed that Mac Rabor, I remember the guy that I took it over from, not Ray Moore. Wilson McCoy, right. So it seems that he got sick, went into the hospital, and he had some kind of a heart seizure. And he passed away in the hospital. And meanwhile, I had done a few weeks of work for him, and they told me that he passed away. And then there was a long period of negotiations, and I finally got the strip in towards the end of 61. And it's just a little before David was born. David was born in February of 62. So I always said that he was my good luck omen. When my wife was carrying him, I always felt he was a good luck charm. So when they told me that I got the script, I went up there and they told me, we're not only giving you the daily, we're giving you the Sunday too. We like your work. Well, I tried to call home. Nobody was home. I couldn't reach anyone. Couldn't reach my wife. And I tried calling my mother-in-law, and she wasn't home. And my mother, I don't know where she was, but she didn't ask. I couldn't reach anyone. So I went into a bar and had a beer just to celebrate it, but I had to do something. And but I was very, very happy with having worked for King Features. They were a wonderful outfit. I did very well with them.
Talent certainly runs in the family, because your brother Dan had a great run with Flash Gordon, among other strips, and is one of the symbols of the New York slick style. I know that later on you had some mismatches, but with all the time that passed, in hindsight, how do you remember your relationship with him, both professionally and personally?
Well, it would take much too long. It would take much too long to explain, but it was not a good relationship. Very difficult. He was a very difficult personality. Had a lot of problems. He was a brilliant guy who was just too overwhelming in the way he dealt with people. A very difficult person. He was bitter, and you couldn't get too close to him. When you did, he had a way of cutting you off suddenly, and you're left out in the cold. He was just a difficult person. He was a brilliant artist. He taught me a great deal. He was 5 years older than me, and but he was a very tough person to work for. Very tough. I mean, it was very difficult staying with him, trying to stay with him. And I broke away from him several times, but he always came back and begged me to help him out. He was in trouble. He needed some help. And before you knew it, I was back working for him again. And marvelous artist and brilliant guy. But all of those went to zilch because it was of no value, because he had a difficult personality and a very difficult way of dealing with people. And no one, he really had very few friends at the end, very few. So he was a tragic story. And fortunately, I had a good wife, a very good wife, and wonderful children. They're so devoted to me, and grandchildren too. I had a good life, and I would never have wanted even though with his brains and his abilities, I would not have wanted his life. I was extremely happy with mine. He had three wives and a few girlfriends on the side. And, he was just a very difficult guy. So I would rather spend time talking about my career. I started drawing before I could even write. I remember that. I remember having crayons and having pencils and always drawing. I think I was less than 5 when I was drawing, and I always loved it. It was always part of my life. Even in school, I would be able to get time off to do these. The schools would have their own plays. The kids would get on stage and put a play on for the rest of the school. And I always did the backdrops for the plays. So I was always getting time off from my classes to do the backgrounds for the plays. And I missed so much in classes, I had to cram in order to pass my test. But there was an advantage to it because when I finally took my test, it was so fresh, all the cramming. In fact, my wife would, when we were teenagers, we met when we were teenagers, late teenagers, and she would help me cram for my tests. And fortunately, I had a pretty good memory, so I was able to memorize. I didn't know what a lot of it meant, but I was able to memorize it. And I did pretty well on my test. It didn't frighten me. It did all right. So I managed to pass very well. But that was a lot of my career. I had certain privileges through school because of my skills. It was very pleasant.
Before the big break with the Phantom that you already told me about, what are the happiest memories that you have from the comic book industry, from working in comic books before the Phantom? What are the most happy memories you have?
Well, I think mostly the acceptance that I got from my editors. I think I was most gratified by the way they felt, the respect I got from them. I mean, sometimes they could be a pain in the ass, but they in general, they were pretty considerate and very respectful of my work and my position.
How do you contrast those times with what you witness nowadays?
What I witness in comics itself?
Yes.
Today's, my vision of today is against yesteryear?
Yes.
Yeah. During those days, I worked with guys like Carmine Infantino and Gil Kane, and I was in that time period. I was working in that time period. Every time I delivered, I'd see one of the guys that I know, Russ Heath, and so many of the better artists, George Tuska, and so many different artists that Alex Toth was one of the best.
Yeah,
you know his work.
Yes, I know.
Right, and I inked a lot of his work, as well as doing my own. I did romance and war stuff and mystery. I did some mystery. I ghosted on Superman and Batman. I just wanted a couple of stories on Batman, but mostly Superman. And it was I developed that dog, that Superman had, the little white dog.
Yes.
What was its name?
Crypto.
Crypto. Yes, Crypto. That was the name of the dog, right?
Yeah.
And but I drew it a little differently than the way they carried it on. They made him look too simplified. I gave it a little more three-dimension when I drew it, and the dog had more body to it. After I got off of it, I noticed that it started to look a little weak, the dog, and a little more like a puppy than a full-grown, strong dog, So I was a little disappointed the way they carried it forward from when I left it. But I enjoyed working for guys like Bob Kanigher up at DC. And I did a lot of work for Stan Lee at Marvel. And he liked me a lot. And on one occasion, he gave me a script, and he said, "But I don't want you to do it this way. I want you to," and he gets up on a desk. There's a Stan Lee. You've seen him perform, right? I mean, he's like a little child, really, when he talks. He has a real love for comics, and he talks like a child, like he really loves it. He gets up on the desk and he leaps down. He said, "I want you to grabbing the guy like this and leaping on him." And he jumps off the desk and he's got his knees on the floor and he's making like he's wrestling with it. He was a riot. He was a very funny guy. I mean, I would tell this story to all the other artists. He said, "Well, that was nothing. He did this. He stood by the window. It looked like he was going to jump out." And they told other stories about a real zany guy, but he loved his comics. He really loved his comics. And but I worked working on the Phantom all those years. That was my real love. In fact, when I was a teenager, I said, someday, if I don't get an illustration, I would love to work on that script, The Phantom. I would love to fix it up and make it real dramatic, because at those days, Wilson McCoy was working on it. And
so I
think you knew his style. It was almost childish.
I understand that there was some resistance when you when I started implementing your style. There was some resistance, right?
Well, the first week looked like Flash Gordon. It didn't look like Wilson McCoy's work, so they paid me for it. I don't know what happened to the pages. They got lost somewhere, but I would have loved to have that first week. And I had to kind of reduce my style, my technique. I had to undo a lot of the blacks and things that I did to give it body.
If you had to single out one of the works that you've made before 1961, which one would be and why?
I would say it was the story I did with Alex Toth, yeah. Well, he had become DC's fair-haired boy. They really loved his work, and so did the artists. Artists loved his work, and they were with him about a spirit in the mountain. There's an avalanche, and the effects that he got. And his pencils were just wonderful. I inked that story, and I was so proud to ink it because most of the artists thought that was the classic story produced. I mean, every artist were amazed by the story, by the pencils of the ink. So that was probably, and he and I became pretty fair friends as a result. He really enjoyed my work my inking over his pencil. He always called for me to do his inking. So I had a lot of respect for him. He was a wonderful artist, another egotist, so very, very swell head, Probably wore a size 16 hat, So I would go out with Alex Toth and Joe Giella. He worked on, do you know Carmine Infantino? Did you know his work?
Yes.
Okay. Most of his inking was on Carmine's work, and he worked on Gil Kane's pencils too. So he was a very popular inker, and he goes to a lot of conventions now. He's retired. Because after he left comic books, he started to do Mary Worth, the comic strip. It was called Mary Worth. All right, but he was I met him in high school, back when we were 15 years old, back in high school. And he and I and two other guys remained friends for many years, well over 50 years. And two of them are gone, and Joe is still alive, and I'm here, but two of them are gone. and we were very close friends, very close for all those years. And Joe worked with me on other things, on other projects. So we remained friends. I still talk to him now. He's my age. He's 3 months younger than me. So
nice to
so those were the guys I have my closest relationship. As far as artists are concerned, those are my closest relationships.
Can you tell me more about those early days in the Phantom, and how did you work with Lee Falk? Do you remember the first time you've met, what you've talked about? How do you approach the collaboration with Falk?
Well, not having worked with him before, my first experiences with him were reasonably pleasant. He tried to set himself up as though he were my boss, but I soon put a quick end to that. He was not my boss. It was King Features that was my boss, and he had no regulation over me, or no judgment over me. If there was a problem, I dealt with the syndicate. I dealt with the managing editor, and I made sure I didn't deal with him and make him and help him feel like he's my boss. So my relationship with him at the beginning was reasonably smooth, and it was working well. But then he began to try to throw his weight around, and that's when I began to resist. And we had a unspoken little bit of an animosity between each other. Unspoken, okay? We kind of shrugged each other. He tried to shrug me, and I gave him a lot in return. I shrugged him in return. But I didn't try to be spiteful or difficult with him, but it was he who gave me a difficult time. And of course, I had to react. I couldn't let him take control of my position as the artist. And that's what he tried. Run across a lot of wild and woolly egotists.
Even with those problems, you've managed to have a very fruitful collaboration for the fans. For example, for me, it's certainly the period of the Phantom that I recognize more clearly, and that is more present in my life, is the period you have drawn the Phantom with Lee Falk. So what would be, if we put aside those less positive things, what do you think are the best things you've got from that experience?
From my relationship with Lee, the working relationship, you mean, or any other thing?
From the relationship and from Phantom, it's from the period of working.
Right. I think working on the strip itself, first of all, let me start with how I felt about the strip, because that kind of guided me as to how I would approach working on it. And I particularly liked it, even as a kid. The thing that I liked mostly about the strip was the novel idea that a costume character, the very first to be presented, had this content of being part fantasy and part adventure. And the introduction of fantasy as well as the adventure was a very clever thing that Lee Falk introduced. It was something very, very well thought out and well planned. And even his domain, everything that he set up seemed to click, seemed to be something that was, so I thought it was sheer genius for him to have thought of this concept of this man tucked away in a cave, in his own domain, and then would come out every once in a while, come out of his cocoon, and and begin to punch people around and bring them back to justice, bring them into to deal with justice. So he was always going to fight against evil. He held that skull in his hand, and said he will devote his life to against evil and for justice. So that concept and the concept of his being assumed as a ghost, and that he lived 400 years, and it was just very, very cleverly put together. I thought it was a touch of genius there, and that's what made it. That's really that issue and that concept is what kept it alive for so many years, because it was so totally different and unfamiliar to the average reader. So that's why it remained successful for so many years. It was the mystique about it, that constant mystique that went on, And he knew how to keep the people hanging on a cliff, He always had this cliffhanger ending to his story, to his weekly presentation. So he was good. He was a good writer. He was good. He knew his work. He knew his career. He was very skilled. But as an individual, I could do without him. I need him as a writer, but as a friend and an individual, I could do without him very easily.